Good evening, everyone. As I mentioned at the beginning of the sit, Diana's off teaching a retreat, so I'll be filling in for her tonight. My name is Jim Podolske. If you've been following the talks over the last maybe 5 or 6 weeks, Diana's been talking about some of the characteristics or qualities that are required to achieve a goal. You know, what things you need if you really want to achieve something. I think in particular she's talking about achieving freedom from suffering, freedom from greed, delusion, and hatred, a sense of peace, a sense of calm. And one of those 5 elements she talked about was energy or effort, that it takes some energy or effort if you want to accomplish something. She often reads some poetry. I don't have any, but when I think about a song that I know from my youth, you won't get it wishing and a hoping, thinking and a praying. So just wishing and hoping and thinking and praying won't get you to where you want to go. It does take effort. The Buddha's primary teachings about how to do this are encompassed in what's known as the Eightfold Path. And one of them is called right effort, or wise effort, or skillful effort. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. It just so happens that IMC has a 9-month program about the Eightfold Path. And this month, actually this coming Sunday, there'll be a half-day event here all about right effort. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, it's available both in person and online. But it's the first of the 3 elements of the path having to do with cultivating heart and mind. So one of the books for that class is this one called The 8 Mindful Steps of Happiness by Bhante Gunaratana. And I've read it a couple of times. In fact, I was just going through the chapter on right effort over the weekend in preparation for this Sunday. And it's part of the practice that isn't, well, I don't think any of the practice is relegated to just the times when you're doing formal sitting practice. But right effort is definitely something that you can do throughout the day, as long as you're awake, conscious. It's a way to cultivate states of heart and mind that are skillful for achieving freedom from suffering, and for weeding out those states that aren't helpful. So skillful effort you could think of as a little bit of way of mental gardening. It's how do you water and nourish and tend to those things that you want to grow, and how do you uproot the weeds, the things that get in the way, that sap the energy from your garden. So there's 4 skillful efforts. The first one is preventing the arising of unarisen negative states of mind. So if you can catch yourself before one of these things arises, then you don't have to go through and experience that. It's easier said than done. So the second one is abandoning arisen unskillful states of mind. So once they're there, what do you do? What do you do with them? The third skillful effort is bringing into being unarisen skillful states. So how do you cultivate? How do you recognize that this might be a time where you can bring forth a wholesome state? How would you do that? And then the fourth one is maintaining an arisen wholesome state. So once it's arisen, what do you do to keep it going? So I'll share some of the things that Bhante Gunaratana has written, and some of the things that over the years I've acquired either from other teachers or from direct experience. You know, what works for doing this, preventing the unwholesome, abandoning the unwholesome once it's arisen, bringing into being unarisen wholesome, and maintaining the wholesome. So the first thing would be knowing, what are these? Like, how do you, what are wholesome and what are unwholesome? At a deep, deep level, there's these, it's said, the Buddha said, there are these 10 fetters. There's these 10 habits of mind and perception that keep us fettered to suffering, keep us kind of not really seeing things clearly. And those are things that take some period of time, I would imagine years or decades, although some people maybe it's only days or weeks. But I suspect for most it's a long-term practice to see these fetters and uproot them. In the shorter term, there's 5 conditions or 5 activities of the mind called the hindrances, which are described as the intense, gross manifestations of the fetters. So I'm guessing at least some of you have heard of the 5 hindrances. If you haven't, there's this wonderful book that Gil Fronsdal wrote a few years ago called Unfettered, that both describes them and describes particular practices you might do to work with them, get to know them, and over time reduce them or get free of them. So the 5 fetters, the first one is greed or lust. So I would imagine most people would have some notion of what that is, that it isn't just desire, it isn't just wanting, but it's that maybe compulsive, obsessive grasping after something, often sense experience, but it could also be an object, or it might be some kind of identity, some way that you want to be seen. And so that's one of the hindrances that kind of distorts our perception of what's going on. Everything is kind of colored or flavored by that hindrance. And so it's one place to start is not by saying, okay, I'm never gonna lust again. I'm never gonna have greed again. But rather to really get to know it, get familiar with it. How does it feel? And what are the conditions under which it arises? So knowing that is very helpful in doing this practice. I'll say essential. I mean, I don't think that you can say I'm going to practice the Buddha's path and become enlightened, but I'm not going to look at greed and lust. It's there. So you might as well make a kind of a conscious decision that that's something to look at. The second one is sometimes called aversion or ill will, hatred. That movement towards pushing away. But pushing in a way, in an unskillful way, either not acknowledging that it's operating, or having some kind of judgment or opinion about either some sense desire or some person or some object or some identity that you're trying to get rid of that that you're trying to get rid of by contracting your mind around, rather than looking at it carefully. Just there's some contraction and some pushing and not really acknowledging. So those are the first two hindrances. They're probably often the strongest. The third hindrance is actually described as a pair of hindrances, sloth and torpor. Now those are words that I suspect none of you use in everyday language. It's kind of old English. What they point at is a certain sluggishness, a certain dullness, a certain kind of low energy that's either in the body or in the mind. So the two, one refers to sluggishness of the body, one refers to sluggishness of the mind. And when when those are operating, it's kind of like, trying to walk through a thick mud or something. It's very slow going and hard to see clearly. So that's often referred to as sinking energy. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. So again, it's a pair, kind of like sloth and torpor. It's energy that's fairly high energy, but scattered. So restlessness is a physical manifestation of that kind of scattered energy. And worry is the mental manifestation of that scattered energy. So it's not just that there's a lot of energy there, it's also that it's really kind of all over the place. It's not collected, it's not unified. And then the fifth hindrance is doubt. I've tried to come up with a good way for myself to understand that one. And I think one way to describe it is a tendency to just keep second guessing yourself. Like, oh, should I do this? Well, no, maybe I should do it this way. No, you know, it's kind of like never centering on one track. Now, it isn't that it isn't useful. There's times when you have to say, okay, I've been following a certain path, and this doesn't look right. So it's time to maybe try something different. But when the mind is continually jumping around, always second guessing itself, that's one way to describe doubt. And when that's happening, then it's hard to be mindful. You know, it's like, well, what's going on right now? No, you know, maybe this is sloth. Maybe this is aversion. So those are the five hindrances: ill will. Lust, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. And you can think of those as sort of like a basis set, that all the other descriptions of unwholesome mind states kind of fit within one of those five categories. So it's helpful in starting this to become familiar with the hindrances, get to know them, particularly how they work for you. So if we move so the hindrances are really what you're going to be looking for in the first two elements of right effort. And so to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome mind states, it's helpful to know what are the conditions, what are the triggers, how can I recognize that an unwholesome mind state lies ahead and do something differently. The example that came to my mind was I've now been managing here at IMC on Monday nights for 25 years. And I live in Mountain View, so I've always had to drive on Highway 101 to get here in the early evening. And for many years, I would get on the freeway, I'd drive a couple tenths of a mile, and then the traffic would just stop. It's right where Highway 85 comes into 101. And I would immediately feel frustration and, a sense of, why is this happening to me? And over time, it suddenly dawned on me, well, number one, I'd often have not eaten supper, so my blood sugar was low. I was kind of tired, low energy. I'd often try to cut it close, like not leave any earlier than I had to. So then if there was any holdup, I'd be feeling anxious about getting there. So there were some conditions that I recognized that I had control over, things that I could do in terms of eating, in terms of timing. Other things that I didn't have any control over. And then the other thing that I had some influence over was how I related to the experience that was going on. when I looked at it as something bad happening to me, it would really cause suffering. You know, it's like these people are sitting in their cars. Why aren't they driving? You know, and don't they know I need to be somewhere? So one of the things that I found was changing my attitude towards the whole experience of, okay, this is an opportunity to practice patience, or this is an opportunity to feel compassion for all the other drivers that are in the exact same place that I am. You know, it's not like they don't all have places to go. So over time, after a number of years, too many for me to want to confess, I came to realize that that I knew that there were conditions. I could change the time that I left, the amount that I ate, also my expectation. You know, it was kind of like I had an expectation that I should be able to do it in 20 to 25 minutes. And sometimes I could, but sometimes it took 45 minutes. So changing that expectation of this is the way life is supposed to go to, getting in the car and going, I don't know how long it's going to take. So why don't I go early and, get a hot chocolate at Pete's or something? Yeah, so I don't think you can really do the first element of preventing until you've spent enough time in the second one of being in the unwholesome states and getting to know them and getting to know what are the causes and conditions, what are the flags that I can see. It might be that if you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, it might be that there's some times of the day that you're just more stable and clear-headed than other times. So getting to know your own heart and mind is helpful in that first element. The second one of abandoning arisen unwholesome states can be more difficult because you're already in it. You're, like when the mindfulness cuts back in or you start to pay attention, you might find, oh, okay, well now I'm really, really angry, or I'm, really anxious or restless or whatever it is. And so there's kind of 5 strategies that the Buddha laid out, and I'm sure there's other ones that you can probably come up with for yourself, for when you find yourself in one of these unskillful states. The first one is, if it's not very strong, you may be able to just ignore it. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean to not know that it's happening, to not be mindful, but rather to decide, okay, I'm not going to get involved with it. Like, it's there, I know it's operating, but I don't need to get involved in it. Just kind of ignore it. And for some unskillful states, that can work. It's just, I was in a car once with 2 people that were having an argument about, or trying to decide who was to blame for something. And I realized it was kind of a worthless argument. I mean, like there was no reason for me to even offer an opinion or say anything, because it just was like, yeah, it doesn't seem like it would lead anywhere useful. So sometimes you can just ignore it. But still be mindful. So this is not delusion. The second one is to divert your attention. So, like when I'm sitting in my car and the traffic's not moving, rather than kind of watching every single movement of the car and wondering if, okay, well now we're starting to move a little bit, maybe this is going to be it, maybe it's over. I could just turn on the radio and listen to classical music, and just let that be a more soothing, satisfying experience than getting caught up in wondering when the traffic's going to start moving again. So that's a little bit more. So there's ignoring it, there's diverting your attention, there's replacing the hindrance with its opposite quality. So each one of those 5 hindrances, you could imagine, has some opposite to it. So lust and greed might be renunciation, generosity, instead of trying to get something, just giving it away. Or recognizing that trying to hold on to it isn't doing you any good. So that's one thing that comes to my mind for being the opposite of greed and lust. For ill will and hatred, aversion is goodwill. Loving kindness, wishing well, offering people harmlessness and safety. Let's see. Sloth and torpor, I guess the opposite of that would be bringing some bright energy, maybe through investigation, joy. Restlessness and worry would be, bringing some. Can you find somewhere in your experience a feeling of calm and collectedness and peacefulness? And one of the things that comes to me for the opposite of doubt would be some sense of confidence or trust, faith. So that's one of the ways is to actually recognize what's happening and see if you can bring some of the opposite to it. The next one is, it says to reason with yourself, to really examine what are the downsides of being in this state? How does it feel? Where's it going to lead? Is this how I want to live my life? And so sometimes just bringing the mind and the reasoning to the experience may help you recognize that this isn't something that you want to feed energy into. And the last one, and this is one I've actually gotten some pushback from psychologists, is to crush it with all your might. So sometimes if it's just, it's just beyond ignoring or diverting or replacing or reasoning, you just use your will like, no, I'm not going there. Now, I think the difference is this doesn't mean repression in the sense that you're pretending as though it's not, that impulse is there. You know it's there, but part of you knows, I'm not going to give in to this impulse. So I think of things where you're ready to do some sort of damage, physical damage or violence. I think if you're mindful, it could be a really, really strong desire to take your coffee cup and throw it across the room, or or something like that. But just knowing, I'm not going to do that. So that's kind of the last option that the Buddha gave, and I think it's also maybe one of the least effective. So I think as you cultivate with time, you hopefully won't get there that often, but there may be times when you just need to not give in to a very strong impulse. So some other thoughts. To prevent negative thoughts from arising, maintain mindfulness. So your mind is always going to be doing something. You're always going to have some sort of state going on. So with mindfulness, at the very least, you can know what that state is, kind of be aware, not just a name for it, but what it feels like, the emotion associated with it. And then mindfulness combined with wisdom, kind of that knowing it, patience, and effort can help you both prevent and abandon the unwholesome states. Some of the other advice on this is the longer that you wait to notice it, the stronger it may get. So there's a real value to noticing these unskillful states sooner rather than later. Not after a full-blown argument, like, I guess I was angry. But noticing it before you say the first word is that much better than after the last word has been said. So then the last two, the bringing into being of wholesome states, wasn't talked as much about in this book, but there's several that come to mind. Number one is practicing the Brahma-viharas. So loving kindness, compassion practice, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Those are four practices that you can read about. There's a book called Loving Kindness by Sharon Salzberg, and others. I mean, it's a heavily traveled topic, and so that's something that you can do either in a period of in a period of meditation, or just any time throughout the day. I usually try to do a little bit before I get out of bed in the morning. There was one practice that somebody taught me, that when you're waiting in the airport to get on the plane, you can just wish well for all of these strangers that are walking by on the concourse. Like, they're people you've never seen before, you'll probably never see them again, but can you just wish them well? Like, oh yeah, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, May you be peaceful. I think it's a much more productive practice than sitting and reading a magazine. Or listening to the news on the big, television screens in the waiting room, in the waiting area. So those are practices that you can do for creating wholesome states if they're not arisen. There's a whole series of practices called the paramis that are foundational practices for this. So things like practicing generosity, practicing patience, determination, ethics, renunciation. These are all practices that you can do that don't necessarily immediately create the state that you want, but they set the conditions for it. So for example, if you're doing loving kindness practice, metta, there's phrases that you can create for yourself. And sometimes you say the phrases and it just doesn't seem like much is happening, but it's creating the conditions for wishing well for others, for yourself and for others. And then, so there are practices that you can do and that you can make part of your everyday life for bringing into being unarisen wholesome states. And then maintaining them, there's the suggestion, at least in this book, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, is gathering with like-minded friends and reading Buddhist texts. So finding other people that are interested in this, that you can talk to, that share the challenges that they're facing, that support you and that you support in cultivating wholesome states of mind. I'm in a group that meets once a week on Tuesday nights, where we talk about our practice with each other. There's another group I meet with once a month. We do the same thing. And then I come here and I get a chance to talk to people that show up. And I usually have at least some kind of conversation with whoever's teaching that night about what came up for me in the course of the evening. It doesn't necessarily need to be even another Buddhist practitioner. I mean, there are people who follow other paths that also want to cultivate kindness, harmlessness, freedom. And so, you might find a family member or a friend or a coworker or somebody, other people that will help you maintain some of these wholesome states. Because it isn't, to use a common phrase, it isn't one or done. It isn't like, okay, now I've cultivated loving kindness. I don't need to do that anymore. The mind has a tendency to go back to the habits it's had over a long period of time. So it's a long-term project to keep moving your awareness from these afflictive states to ones that are peaceful and free. So I hope that was useful to you all. We've got a few minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions. Or make comments, or...
Sure.
Can,
A girlfriend of mine said, Janet, you're talking negatively again. Everybody could hear that. Janet,
well, there's people online.
oh, Janet, you're talking negatively again. She reminded me of that last night. I thought, oh, no. I need her around me more often to remind me that I'm doing that. It's...
Thank you. Just a comment. Your anecdote about your commute 101 was reminding me of a quote I read online. I think it was like a systems engineer or something discussion. But a lot of people like to say, oh, I'm stuck in traffic, right? They tell others. And the quote went something like, the reality is you're not in traffic, you are traffic.
Exactly.
And it got me thinking about that, so I wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. It's, you know, you are part of it. It isn't something that's happening to you.
When I'm in one of those negative states, I think of it as.
Could you hold it? Yeah.
Think of it as time to weather the storm. So yeah, I'll recognize it. You know, allow it. Mm-hmm. Maybe be with it a bit, and then it fades away. Eventually, hopefully,
Thanks.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
All right. Well, part of this practice is if you recognize it, you can at the very least open your umbrella. I mean, you don't have to. You have some volition in what happens. So anyway, thank you for that. Okay, well, it's just about 8:30, so I'll thank you all for coming tonight, and I'll encourage you to, may all your effort be skillful.